Hi, and welcome back. I'm Kanisha Leggett with KUMSOT. Today I will be talking about several different topics that I've gone over this week during my fieldwork. The first one will be what I have learned this week during fieldwork. One, we looked at several assessments that were completed during the evaluation process. We looked at potential community resources that we would provide to our client. And we also looked at why there might be a difference in the results that one therapist receives when completing an assessment and the different results another therapist might receive when completing the exact same assessment. So, what I learned this week during my simulation was the importance of knowing my client, the value of the evaluation process, and how important it is in the guiding of the interventions that I choose and the assessments that I utilize with that client, as well as knowing that the discharge plan does not begin when I'm in preparation for sending my client home, but the discharge process begins during the evaluation process. During that process, I am already thinking of where I plan to discharge my client on anticipation of them meeting my said goals and completing my said interventions. So it is important to begin thinking about the discharge plan at the evaluation process because it allows you to guide your treatments and goals and interventions toward that end result. Now, yes, many things can come up between the evaluation and the discharge plan to change where your client will be discharged to. But at least if you are working towards a goal with equipment and training towards a designated discharge plan, then you know your client is on track. Now, you may have to adapt or modify your treatment intervention or your discharge plan along the way, but you at least need to begin thinking about where this client will be discharged to. The next thing we're going to talk about are some of the assessments that were completed during the evaluation. Some of those assessments were range of motion, manual muscle testing, sensation testing, tone testing, pain, and balance. So typically, I enjoy the balance test. I always like to challenge my patient, and for me, seeing where they are in regards to their balance, both sitting and standing, dynamic and static, gives me a great place to start with what level of intervention and what stage of the process I will begin at with my intervention. So for a client who has decreased static sitting balance, we will do a lot of things close guarded at the tabletop, with me sitting right next to them, challenging to build up that core strength and work on that weight shifting to improve the dynamic sitting balance. For a client who has increased, let's say, dynamic standing balance, for them, we're doing a lot of standing. We're doing a lot of functional reaching. We're doing a lot of movement, coordinated movements, incorporating both hands and feet, stepping and reaching at the same time. So that is why I prefer balance assessments. Now, an assessment that I find not necessarily challenging, but that you must be precise with is going to be your range of motion measurement assessment, because those numbers are important that we make sure they are within the range that is considered normal. That way you'll be able to know what is abnormal. You must know the client's prior level of function and medical status, if they've had any previous surgeries or anything like that, so that you can know whether they were previously working with full range of motion or limited range of motion. Those numbers, be it whether you complete it or another therapist completes them, your number should be within a few degrees of each other unless there has been a significant change in medical status, or there has been a significant improvement, maybe a reduction in edema or pain, So there's an increase in improvement of the range of motion numbers, which is why it is imperative that you know your anatomy, kinesiology, in order to complete the proper measurements, and that you're knowing your insertion and origin points so that you know where it is you're moving to and from, and what muscle you're actually moving, what joint is moving, what's going on during that movement that you're measuring. So that's very important. So let's say that you get different numbers from your therapist, as in you complete an assessment and you receive one number, and a different therapist completes that exact same assessment and they receive a different number. Now, that can be explained in several ways. One, by time of day. If the patient is now much more tired than they were when you initially did the test. Let's say you did your test in the morning and they were alert and aroused, and then the physical therapist did their test in the evening. Maybe they were sundowning or increased fatigue had set in. The other thing that can explain those changes would be medication. If they were, let's say, in a lot of pain, they're more apprehensive, more guarded during your assessment, whereas once pain medication kicked in, they were a little more relaxed and willing to go through the assessment. The other thing that can be considered during that time is edema and swelling during your assessment, because that will limit movement and function during the assessment. So that could be another reason. And then also cognitive status. Sometimes when your client is coming out from anesthesia or a medication, they can be resistive or combative or increase confusion, unable to follow simple commands. But once that medication has dissipated and flushed through their system, then their more normal cognition returns and they can respond to those simple commands and follow what you need them to do. And that could explain the difference in your numbers as opposed to the numbers they received. So it is very important that you understand and know what community resources are available for your client. The reason this is important is because when you are discharging a patient home or to another facility or into an outpatient setting, you want to know that your client is being discharged at the highest level possible, but also at the safest level. You want to know that if your client goes home and they are no longer under your care, should they need something, there is some place set up in place for them to be able to either contact, go, or apply for those resources to assist them in getting the help that they need. This is why it's important that you know what community resources are available to your client. Because if your client needs something that is not locally available, you should have already gone through and located that item or those resources prior to their discharge as a preparation state for them being discharged home or to the next level of care. So the last thing we want to do is discharge our client that may need further resources such as support groups or respite care or home care services, and we do not have that information to provide. Then we have discharged our client home or to the next level of care unprepared, which increases a risk, a safety risk. So that's why it's important that you know your community resources that are available for your client, because they may change based off age, income, insurance, diagnosis. All of those factors are viable variables that play a role during what your client can receive as a resource. So again, I'm Kenesha Leggett with KUMSOT. I want to thank you for sitting in with me this evening as we discussed the importance of community resources, justifying a difference in the results you receive from assessments between therapists, some assessments that are completed during the evaluation process, and the importance of beginning your discharge planning during the evaluation process. Again, thanks for joining me and have a great evening. I'll look forward to seeing you next week.